Hello and welcome to my virtual presentation. My name is Jennifer McCreary, and I'm the Technical Manager for Training and Education for NSF International. And I welcome you to join my presentation on gaining employee engagement. My presentation is going to be focused really on gaining engagement through training with a focus on food safety practices, but really a lot of the tips, the tools that I'm speaking about, you're going to be able to use in any type of training that you're delivering. At this time, I'd like to thank the SIAL Organizing Committee and my colleagues at NSF for this opportunity to speak with you. Hopefully you are familiar with NSF, but just in case you're not, it says we're an independent not-for-profit organization. We're really headquartered in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with offices around the world. Probably most familiar with us as a certification body or as an auditing group coming in to visit you, but we're also involved in standards writing, testing, and independent of our certification body and auditing is our consulting technical services group and the group that I'm aligned with, the training group. Our training group is pleased to say that we are approved as an accredited provider of IASSIT continuing education units. IASSIT is an international accreditation for continuing education and training. So it really looks at the professionalism of the training that we're delivering, our competency of the trainers that we have, and probably most relevant to you is the security of the training information and the security of your information with us. So let's jump right into gaining employee engagement. So when we look at this, we're really thinking in terms of training engagement, and we have to think about, is training just one more thing we're looking to check off that list? So, are you using the same presentation year after year, but you're really not seeing anything different in the activity and the attitude of employees? Or are you just using training kind of the minimum to meet GFSI standard requirements? Or is your intention, and this is where we get employee engagement, is your intention to ensure that if people are competent going through? So let's look at what we want to do with employee engagement, and really what's the value and how important it is for us to have engaged employees. Well, this is some figures for you. We probably have, depending on what area that you look, may come up with some different figures, some different numbers that would be there. But I can tell you I have never found that engaged employees actually reduced the satisfaction or company performance. As you can see here, that we have that increase in employee performance, increased customer satisfaction that's there, and decrease in employee turnover, that voluntary turnover that means that we have to retrain employees going in. So as I say, when I look at myself in terms of my involvement with training, it always makes me wonder why organizations aren't taking more consideration about the training that they're delivering so that they're making sure that those employees are engaged. So what do we mean by employee engagement? Well, what it is it's that emotional commitment that employees have to the organization and your goals. And as I said, I'm going to focus primarily on food safety. A recent study that I was looking at showed that they went through and looked at the reasons why employees didn't follow food safety practices. And 35% of the companies that said that employees who were not following food safety practices, 35% of them indicated it was because employees were not engaged. The really scary part about that has actually gone up over the last 2 years. 2 years ago when this study was done, that number of employees not being engaged was 30%. Today it is at 35%. And as we look at food safety culture and really the increased focus of GFSI on food safety culture, the Global Food Safety Initiative, employee engagement is a key part of making sure that we are working towards an improved food safety culture. So what happens when we don't have any engagement? Very often when there's a food safety incident, we'll get a call, I'll get a call, and the quick answer is people say, well, we'll train them. We're just going to retrain them to go through. But I have to ask, what if we've already been training? Why are they still not following those practices? And you may have heard this definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. Well, when we look at our training, we want to make sure that our training is going to help us engage the employee and ensure that we have a different outcome, a beneficial outcome. So let's get started in. So how do we go about getting in employee engagement? Well, the first thing is to establish the current behavior with training. So when we think in terms of training, it's not one size fits all or one time, one and done. What it is there's a number of times where we have to deliver training. And we call these training moments. And what it is that, thinking of a new employee coming in, they're learning for the first time. So we have training that is delivered when employees first join our company. Then as employees think of, with food safety, think of good manufacturing practices that, employee practices that we would deliver. And then as we move from there, we go on to expanding our knowledge. We're building on that foundation that we had from the beginning. So it might be moving someone from an employee who's moving on to a HACCP team, that has analysis critical control point team. So they're expanding their knowledge to go through. And then we move from there on to acting, putting what we've learned into practice. Go through, and then because we know that things happen, things go wrong, we have to fix something, we have problem solving, and then probably the moment that we're most involved in the food industry is changing how things are done. It's interesting, I was at a meeting about a year ago, and there was somebody who was presenting on change in the industry. And they have said that there's as much change happening now within a 30-year period as what there was in a 60-year period, that we have almost 100% changeover in terms of what employees need to know. That's incredible. I mean, in a change in 60 years, we probably wouldn't have that within our lifetime of working. But if every 30 years, that means we're going to have a wholesale change of what we're doing at least once within our work life that's there. So why might employees not be doing what they're supposed to be doing? Why might they not to go through? So the first thing is that we know that many employees don't do what they're supposed to because they don't know what they're supposed to do. It's a lack of knowledge or skill. And that may be because we haven't, or probably most likely is because we haven't given them that knowledge or skill. We say clean a piece of equipment, but we haven't gone into the details of how to disassemble, how to clean it, sanitize it, reassemble, and put it back. We expect that food safety and food safety practices are common sense, but we know that that's not necessarily within everybody's venue or purview of looking at food safety. So when we look at what people need to know, so we're going to talk a little bit more about how we get people to know what they're supposed to do. But even before that, we want to look and say, is it a resource issue? And part of it is looking. We often default to saying we're going to retrain people, but we haven't given them the resources. I was called into a company to go in. They had taken a nonconformance on an audit, and I was asked to go in and train their employees on hand washing. Before I went in to deliver the training, I went in to look and do a bit of a needs assessment. I found out that their employees knew how to wash their hands. What the problem was is they had about 30 people returning from break to a ready-to-eat product that was manually being hand-packed, and they only had one hand-wash sink. So when we look at this, is the reason that people are not doing what they're supposed to do, is it a resource issues? Please note, training, as much as I am involved in training, training is not always the answer to go in. When we find out the training is that we have to give them some additional training, they've got the resources, but they're still not doing what they're supposed to do, well then that's when we look at what is the competence of people that would be there. And so when we talk in terms of competence, there's three components to it. There's the knowledge that people have to know. What do people need to know? Then there's the skills. What are the things that people need to know how to do that's there? And then the final part of it, bringing those knowledge and the skills, is am I confident in carrying that out, applying it on the job? Remember, that was that third, that to go through that application. Ideally, when we're delivering training, is that those three things will come together and we have trained and created an expert who's going to carry out the work the way that we've trained them, the way that we expect them to. However, we do know that that is not always the case. That to go through is that what we will have sometimes is we have people who they've gone through the training, they've gone through the training that we've given them, the facts that we have, that we showed them what to do, but they're not confident to do the right thing. They're really uninformed. They didn't really understand the knowledge or the practices that we were showing to them. It may be because English or French was a second language for them. It may be that we use technical jargon. We use a lot of short forms in the food industry, and somebody who's new to the food industry, think of GMPs and HACCP as two of them. Those are things that people don't understand if they haven't been involved. And so if we haven't explained, or if we go through too fast, we've got that 1/2 hour to get them trained before they need to be on the line, they may not be confident to do the right thing. They're uninformed that's there. This one is relatively easy if this isn't the individuals that you find out that this is the current situation. This is going back and delivering additional training, giving them additional knowledge, looking at your training programs, making sure that they are explaining things in the language and the way that somebody new to this topic is going to understand. The second individual, they may have understood, they may have understood the knowledge that we've given them, they may know how to carry out the skill, the practice that's there, but they're not confident putting it into place when they're back on the job. We haven't given them enough time to practice to become confident. With this one, they're doubtful that they're carrying it out correctly. And so they may hesitate. They may put off doing something because they're not sure they're doing it correctly. With this individual, this one is where our coaching, our mentoring, our on-the-job support becomes very key so that we're building that confidence within that individual to go through, giving them a chance to practice, putting it in place so that they know that, they've got that knowledge, they've got that skill, and they're confident that they're doing it correctly. Our final individual is actually our most serious. And in this case, the individual thinks they understood what they need to do and why. They're very confident. They're out there, they're highly confident, but they're actually misunderstood. They're misinformed about what needs to be done. They're doing it incorrectly. And so this is why it's really important when after we've trained that we haven't thought, okay, we've done the training, they wrote the test, if you've given a test, everything's good to go. Especially not just taking the fact that somebody's confident as being that they are competent to carry out the work. We really have to go out, observe them, review them, making sure that they are understood and they're carrying out the job the way that we had trained them to do. And it's interesting that with a lot of different legislation, the different GFSI standards that are there, is that they have changed from saying that a person is trained to saying a person is trained and they're competent, because they recognize that just because somebody has gone through training, that tick the box, does not necessarily make them knowledgeable and confident in what they need to do. So back to our training moments, that we have those 5 that are there. The 2, the new and the more, those tend to be formal. Those tend to be, when pre-COVID, when we were classroom or going through formal to go into it. Our 3 on the right are more the informal. This is more on the job, where we're going in, we're applying what we learned during the formal training. We're applying it, we're using it, solving those problems when they come up, and then making changes if need be. What it is a lot of times we focus our efforts on formal learning, but we know that 75% of all workplace learning is done informally. So we need to make sure, and that's where looking at that engagement, that we're still engaging with those learners during the informal part of this, so that they are learning what they need to do. I like this. This was a quote, something about, it's not about what they know, it is about what they do. So making sure that that informal learning that's there. So thinking about that informal learning is, we now have to look at, are people using that information? So this was looking and saying, okay, are we providing the right training? So there was a study done a few years ago that 90% of companies provide food handler training. And as part of that food handler training, there was hand washing that was done as part of that. They went back and they looked at those 90%, and they found out that only 11% of the employees were washing their hands properly, as they had been taught during the food handler training program. They thought, wait, we have 90%, but only 11%. As they went on, they found that only 20% of those companies provided supervisor training. So not just the same training that the frontline staff is having, but also additional training, how to supervise, how to explain why the steps, the food safety practices are necessary. So that they were really reinforcing back to that 75% informally on the job. If our supervisors are not providing the right information, the right support, that may be why employees are not doing what they're supposed to do. And it's interesting, again, with a lot of the new regulations and GFSI standards are really focused and really emphasizing supervisor competence, that they understand and they know why these practices are important that's there. So it's looking at not just providing training, but who and what training needs to be provided. So the second part of this is looking at leading the way. And so with this one is looking, saying, what training needs to be provided? How do I make sure that I'm engaging individuals? So the first one is to look and make sure that you're making it personal. Learners need to be able to see themselves. I need to be able to see myself or what I do in the training. I have to be able to look and say, okay, how does this training, this process, this requirement affect me? It's really kind of a WIFM, that what's in it for me. Because if it's never happened to me, those food safety practices, if I've never gotten sick, if somebody in my family's never gotten sick, I may think it's not going to happen to me. So we have to make sure that people can see themselves, and that they can see that if they are not carrying out that work correctly, the way that they've been trained, there are going to be consequences for them. So I know one of the things when some companies that I have worked with, as we've done some allergen management training, a number of companies, and this was one to go through and to look at. They brought in children of one of the line workers who had severe anaphylactic allergies, and so the child, I think he was about 8. You can imagine when you have an 8-year-old telling you about the 15 plus times that he's been rushed to the emergency room because of his anaphylactic, he's gone into anaphylactic shock. That's much more relevant to me than somebody saying, okay, here's the key allergens. We have 2 to 4% of people that are allergic, especially if I've never had a food allergy or know somebody who has. So we have to make it personal. We have to make sure that learners can see themselves in that. So that's where your stories come in. That's where the sharing of information between learners, because it brings in that connectedness that we have here. And that's really one of the things of that key to motivation, the key to people carrying out what they're supposed to do. And so connectedness is one of the key things. So this is where we have shared goals. We encourage teamwork. Back to the one with the allergen management. That happened with one of the companies that I was working with, that we had to have some allergen cleaning that was done. The shared goal, people understood, they knew that little boy who had come in. And so they knew in their case that when they were cleaning those pieces of equipment for allergen cleaning, they were cleaning it for that child that was there. Encouraging teamwork is also one of the things. I've worked with some other companies, but what they have is that when they're getting started, they have a company cheer to go through. It sounds, when you first started, when I first went, it was like, oh, company cheer. And I'll tell you, they are connected to each other. I'm not going to tell you the company that it is, but after being there and listening to them, you could see that they were in it together. That was there. They had a shared goal to achieve what they were going to go through and to look at that was in place. So making sure that we have that competence with, the learning that's there, but at the same time, that engagement is that connectedness that we have. Our step 3 when we're looking at training and engaging learners is respect your learner. To go through. And I love this picture to look at that death by PowerPoint. And it's interesting that this is still, well, actually prior to COVID, this was still our go-to, our most common way of delivering training. But as we know, it may not be the best way. And today, as we have to do more things virtually, as we have SIAL being virtual and this presentation being virtual, we found out that there's some real benefits to virtual training. That in the classroom with a PowerPoint, yes, people can kind of sit back, but as we have different methods, different learner methods, different webinars, different platforms that are used, people have to be engaged because we're able to track their learning, or that at least if we're in the classroom, having it some way that we're going to engage them there as well. So making sure that you're creating new tools, new learning tools and training tools that would be there. Role playing to go through, case studies. I'm always concerned about saying games because people tend to think, well, it's not relevant or it's not beneficial. But games, we learned when we were younger. We learned through playing those games and having competitions. One company I know, they have for those of you who may not be familiar, it's called the lock room. So the employees have to solve different exercises in order to be able to gain the next key and to get the keys to get them out of the locked room that would be there. So keep it simple, keep it fun, but make sure that the delivery method's appropriate to what you're teaching. So hand washing, have them at a hand wash sink. Hand washing, I'm sure that you probably all have used blow gel to go through. You can just Google it if you're not familiar with it, but it shows people with glow gel. It can show them under a black light where they may have missed washing their hands. Thermometer calibration. Have a thermometer. Have them calibrate it. Don't just read work instructions that would be there. The other thing is that with employees is making sure you're bringing in emotion. That's really with food safety. It compels that attention. That people, as I say, if they've never been sick, they don't know what someone who's become ill, they may not realize the impact of having a food safety incident to go through and to look at that's there. So think of, what is it, that emotion that you can have? It may be something that's funny that's happened, maybe asking different people if they've had foodborne illness that would be there, what happened to go through, do they know? So making sure that it's relevant. So, and in this one, think of who is delivering the training. Are they enthusiastic? Do they understand? Do they believe in the training that's being delivered? Think of somebody in a suit and tie delivering training to frontline staff. You're going to look at it, they're going to think that person's not relevant. They don't understand what I have to go through to do my job. One of the things with emotion, and the reason that emotion is so important, is that it's our brain, and they call it the limbic system. Is that limbic system is in our brain is what helps us move information from our short-term memory to our long-term memory. So it's from when just-in-time training to remembering it. And what is important, two things that are very important to move that information from short-term to long-term is the information relatable? Back into that, what's in it for me? Do I understand if I don't carry out my job correctly, what could happen? And is there an emotional appeal? So think about your training that you're delivering it now. Think about the way that you're delivering. What emotion do people get? Or is it the same old, tick the box. There's really no emotion to it. There's no emotion. I'm not going to be engaged, and that's where food safety problems come in. One of the other keys for emotion or to be motivated is choice. So it's not that we're giving employees choice whether to take training or not, but it may be what training do they want to take and when do they want to take it. And how they're going to take it. Do they want to take it face-to-face? Do they want to take it virtual? Do they want to take it, have it delivered through e-learning, self-paced, so that they're able to do it on, at their rate that they want to have that training that's in place? Do they want to have a different type of training first, the information that's there? So really giving the employees a choice on that training of how it's delivered, what's delivered, and when. As long as we're meeting regulations to go through and to make sure that we are ensuring that food safety is done. We've shown that with employees, especially with learners, with adult learners, we learn what is most important to us. And so giving somebody that choice is telling them they want to learn what's most important to them right now, that new things that are on the job that's there. So how do we use that engagement to get the most out of our training dollar? We've talked about making sure that people understand that they're competent that's there, that it's not a resource issue, that they're competent, that they've got that knowledge, that skills, and confidence is the one of the most important, that they feel connected to what they're doing, they feel connected within the group, and that they have a choice. When we have that in place, then we want to look and say, okay, how do we make sure that we are getting the most out of our training dollar? Well, one of the questions that I'm often asked is, how often do I need to train? And I'm going to give you that famous answer that nobody likes. It depends. It depends on what is needed that's there. Are you having food safety issues? If you are, then you need some training that's being done. It's why a needs assessment is so important to look at that training to go through. Are we training at the right time? To look at that. I've gone in and I know that we have to fit training into schedules, but training someone at the end of their shift, they're not going to learn anything. That comes back into that choice. When can I take the training? Can I take it when I want to learn it that's there? So are we training at the right time? It's going to depend a bit on the cost. Now, I have to watch here because, I mean, if we need that training, it needs to be done. But think about somebody taking a university degree. It's much more costly than someone who has a 1-hour webinar. So that frequency, we're probably not going to go back on a lot of times to go over and over again with something that's really expensive. We want to make sure that they have it the first time out. But part of it is making sure that they have time to practice. They have time to put it into place. It also is going to depend a bit on the person. Back to that competence that's there. Does the person need more training? It may not be the entire team, but it may be some individuals who need some additional training. So it's having a needs assessment. Where are the gaps? And is training what we need to fill those gaps? So helping to answer some of those questions in terms of it depends is there a business need? Is training going to help? Or is it resources? Or is it tools? Or is it something else apart from training that's there? So it's really important that you know what that business need is, because if you don't know what it is, you're probably not going to get a positive return on investment of your training. This is going to be kind of that one of insanity again, delivering the same thing over and over again and not getting a different result that's there. So when we look at focusing on that business need, is it going to help? If it is, if there's a business need that the training is, then definitely make sure that you're delivering training that's there. When we train, the first thing is that if that's that business need, we have to be able to articulate that business need. So focusing on the why, focusing on why it's necessary for the company, focusing on why training is necessary for the employee. There's the study that was done recently on food safety by Alchemy said that 25% of people didn't follow food safety presentations because, not presentations, practices, because they didn't know why they needed to do it. Back to that choice. Don't know why I need to do it. I don't think it's important. I choose not to go through. So looking at that why. So I'm sure that everybody knows that, and I think of that why as being our aha moment that's in place. So as a learner, do I know what potentially can happen if I don't carry out the task or the food safety practices as I have been trained? Do I understand the why? I need to know what to do and how to do it. I need to be capable of doing it. I need to remember to do it. But most important, I have to decide to do it. That's that employee culture, that food safety culture that comes into being. So that aha moment is giving me, this is why I need to do this. This is why, whether it's making sure that somebody's not going to get sick, back to looking at what's there. Telling people why, giving them the aha moment. Not only the why is because you need to keep your job, But if we don't carry out or we don't have this practice this way, what people can get sick. And back to that emotion, the stories that come in, the examples of people who've gotten sick that would be there. The next one is making sure that you're setting learning expectations before training begins. Make sure that if you're sending an employee, especially sending an employee out for training, don't just send them out. Send back to that, why are you sending them out? Make sure that they understand and they agree. I will tell you from experience, I deliver HACCP training, and the employees who are the learners who are most engaged are the ones that have been told by the company, when you come back, we want you to help us on our HACCP team. Versus the employees, the learners that I've had who come in and say, I have no idea why I'm here. They just told me to come. Nothing more is asked of them. You're losing your training investment. Make sure that employees know why that they are there, what the expectations are that for them. And that's really when we go through is looking at that with that push versus pull. Most of our training, I'll explain this, most of our training is push. So we look at our schedule and say, oh, we need to do refresher training. It's been 1 year, we need to do a refresher training, and we roll out our training, we set up the schedule, everybody comes in, we give them the same training program that we have for the last few years, and we really don't achieve anything. Whereas pull, this is where employees, back to that choice, have indicated what training that they need to go through and what they need. So a HACCP team may indicate that they need more training on how to carry out validation and verification rather than looking and going back over the 12 steps of Codex HACCP, that they are looking at that pull. So when we look at that pull, is doing surveys with learners, doing surveys, that needs assessments that you have, finding out, these are anonymous. I'm sure probably all of you have filled out at least one of these at some time. But setting them up, sending it out, what training do employees need? It may surprise you that employees don't need that refresher training because they're familiar with it, but they actually perhaps need more training on, can you give me more on why something's happening? So thinking about the growth of pathogens, looking at how pathogens grow, where they come from, allergens, how allergens affect people. So using online survey tools to be able to find out what training employees are looking for with respect to food safety. 3, we deliver training. And then remember that moments of training, 75% of our training is done informally on the job. So you want to provide opportunities for them to practice as often as possible, as soon as possible after learning. That the lack of opportunities, people forget. We know that less than 30% of what is actually taught transfers to the job to go through. So this one is going to sound a little strange when we look at it, that giving them time to practice is really not necessarily, probably encouraging mistakes is not the right word, but perhaps creating a safe environment for them to have those mistakes. So does your training environment allow for safe failures? This is really part of that, building that confidence by learning what doesn't work and that I'm capable of having it work the way that I need to. So make sure that you're encouraging this, providing that area and encouraging people to practice so that they work out what and how to do something that's there. The other thing with looking at this one is that giving them a chance to practice as often and frequently as possible is that forgetting curve. As I just said, that 30% of employees didn't follow programs because they didn't remember. And I think this must be the most frustrating one. I hear people say, but I told them, I told them, I told them. But what it is what they call the forgetting curve. This is the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. He was an individual in the 1880s who looked at memory. And what he found is that within 24 hours, we've forgotten about 75% of what we learned. 75%, 30% of employees said they didn't remember that was there. So this is why one and done training is no longer effective, acceptable. We have to use every opportunity as a training event to reinforce the information. So that black curve is the forgetting curve. Now what it is that Ebbinghaus said there were 3 things to be looked at to be able to bring that forgetting curve up to kind of where that yellow line is up there. He said part of it is was it relevant to people? Was it something that they needed to know that was there, that relevancy to go through? Next is the repetition. So not repetition during the same training program, although that's important as well, but repetition on an ongoing basis. And you can see there that, within 24 hours, kind of the 10 minutes going over key ideas, 7, 5 minutes, and day 30, that 2 to 4 minutes, kind of general. So that can be shift huddles. And here, back to when we talked about the training and the consistency, is providing those supervisors. Remember, only 11% of people wash their hands. We provided 20% of the supervisors with training. This is where this becomes important. Now we want to provide those supervisors with talking points, giving them 1-point lessons so that at that 10 minutes, that 5 minutes, that 2 to 4 minutes, we're making sure that they're giving the right information, they're supporting that information, that they're consistent with that information that's there to go through. So it's an ongoing basis, and they've shown that for each time, our mind remembers more and more. Back to that limbic system, it's gone from our short-term memory into our long-term memory because it's important for us to remember. And then commit to the training that's here is back to that connectedness, that support from supervisors. It is frustrating. One study showed that over 60% of managers did not actively support learners after they'd gone to the training. So make sure that you're committed to that training that is in place, that connectedness that's there to go through. The first thing with this one is to make sure that when you're committing to that training, that you have realistic expectations. When I talk about this is to know, and I'm going to use an example, is that somebody going and attending a 2-day HACCP training program is not going to make them a HACCP expert. It's going to give them some foundations that would be there, that's in place. But we have to go on and reinforce that training. Committing to the training as well is making sure that it's at a time that people are going to learn. It's not on Saturday and Sunday when that's normally their days off or end of shift, because that's when it's convenient for us to deliver training. If we need to deliver that training, it's important there's a business need for it. We have to commit to it, making sure that we have provided that resources and that information for the learners. Now, it doesn't mean that it always has to be face-to-face. There can be active and passive reminders to overcome the forgetting curve. So some passive ones are posters, symbols, slogans that we have. Part of it is just to make sure that those posters, keep them simple, but make sure that it's communicating the right, not just say, you're important for food safety. Well, yeah, I am important for food safety, but what do I have to do? What is it that makes me important for food safety? So make sure they're communicating the right behavior. A number of years ago, a company I worked for, our human resources department decided that they would sign up for a poster subscription, a food safety poster subscription. And what it was is about half the posters that came in, I refused to put up. I said, they don't give the right message. They don't give the message and support the policies that we have internally. So make sure they are communicating the right information that's there. I love this one. Place and wear the desired behavior. Think about hand washing. And I know that kind of regulations say it has to be at the hand wash sink. But if somebody's at the hand wash sink, probably they're already washing their hands. What about the person who gets up and leaves and is walking out? What about having another poster, another reminder at the door that says, did you wash your hands? If no, go back and wash them. It's a reminder to them. And then make sure that you're changing them often enough to prevent desensitizing. So if your posters are looking a little yellow, taped down on the corners, et cetera, that's there, it may be time to replace them that's there. Today, we are so lucky. We have so much social media, so many ways of being able to boost learning, billboards, et cetera, that they constantly change. They're catching people's eye. Another one that's maybe a bit more active in the social media is something kind of that active reinforcement is booster learning. So said that memory is biological. We have to have that constant reinforcement for the memory. And we had a couple of years ago, we started to use something that was called Mind Marker. And we did this with a couple of clients. And what it was is that it was a great program because what it did was it allowed us at the end of the training to have people commit to improving practices. It was a number of supervisors and managers. And so they were committing to making changes in how they supervise food safety and manage food safety. And so on a periodic basis, once a week, once every 2 weeks, maybe twice a week in some cases, we would send out a text message to them saying, okay, you had said that this was what you were going to do, you committed to. Please tell us how you have met that commitment. Or it might be some refresher information that we had gone through at the training. And it was really a great way of reinforcing that information. And we've had anecdotal feedback from the clients that we had done some of this booster learning with, that at the end of the year that there was a significant change in supervision and management of food safety programs, because previously it was sort of, they went, they learned it, they left, and they went back to what they sort of called their real life, back to real life. That this was a way of actively reinforcing the information that was there. And then our fifth one is reward successful performance. Very often we send people almost for training. It's almost a stick. It's almost a negative consequence. They're not doing something right, and we send them for training to go through. But we want to look at that successful performance is that those expectations, are they rewarded if they're doing something right? And yes, I know that we need that stick, that negative consequences if they're not. But we've shown through different research that positive reinforcement is better than negative by a ratio of 4-to-1. A lot of times people have indicated that they're not motivated because there's no consequences if I don't do it. If I'm not doing it right, or if I'm not doing it the way that I was taught, there's no consequences. So it's really important that with food safety, and this comes really back to that food safety culture, that not only do people know why they're doing something, they know the consequence, but they know the consequences for themselves and for their consumers, and perhaps their team if they're not. So we need to set expectations. Are they meeting them? If not, Why not? Why are people not following what they're supposed to do? So make sure there are consequences. They're followed no matter what and no matter who. And the example of this, probably a number of you are familiar with, is the plant manager or, kind of the go through who walks into the facility without washing his hands. And I say he, she, or not removing their watch and their rings that are there. There should be consequences for that individual to go through, especially if somebody sees them and has something that's there. Those consequences, good to really support what's in place, and that negative consequences if there's not. And I'm going to give you an example of one. As I say, if it doesn't really matter who or what that's in place, but making sure that back to that hand washing. It was Joe who was there. Joe was refusing to wash his hands. He would kind of cross his arms and say, "You can't make me wash my hands." It was a smaller company. The president said, tried to find out, was it that Joe didn't like the soap, he didn't like the paper towels that they were using, et cetera, and finally said, "Joe, you know what? I can't make you wash your hands, but I can make it that you no longer work here." And so it was a case of in that situation, Joe ended up leaving the company. Just still don't know why he refused to wash his hands, but to go through is to look at that consequences need to be in place. So just kind of finishing off here is food safety training. You're never finished. You need to look at it from an ongoing continual improvement. And so starting with a plan, having a food safety training plan or any type of a training plan, what training is needed, what group needs it, how, when do they need it, having that not one size fits all or one and done that's there to go through. So who needs what training, when does it need to be delivered, how is it going to be delivered? Carrying it out, the doing that's there, carrying out that training, making sure that it's engaging, making sure that we're using not just that death by PowerPoint, but a lot of it's different social media practices, different social media opportunities that we have, and then check, how do you know the training's working? Very often we say, we give them a test. I'm going to give you an example of one. I had delivered training a number of years ago. Back when I thought a test at the end was the be-all and the end-all. I'd gone in, I was delivering food safety training to a company. It was floor personnel plus supervisors who were there. Glass control was one of the key things we were talking about. There was a test. I'd marked the test at the end of it while I was still there. Everybody passed. I was patting myself on the back. I thought, what a great trainer I am. Walked down into the facility to see one of the supervisors who'd just been in the training program with me, who had received 100% on his test, hanging glass Christmas bulbs over top of one of the production lines. So, yes, quizzes, tests are good. Looking at that check, verifying, looking at the behavior. Are people on the job doing what they're supposed to be? If they're not, acting to correct it, looking at what's there, improving it. And then once you've done that, go back and review. Go back again to the competencies that you said were needed. Practices drop off over time. We may have gone down and reviewed when we first delivered the training and behaviors were fine, but over time, people revert back to what they were doing before. Or operators come up with a different, better way of doing something, but it's not the right way of doing something. Verify. Have employees change their behavior? Are they carrying out what they were supposed to be? Challenge. Ask questions. Observe. Think in terms of your internal audit. Not just asking people what they do, but do people know why they're doing it? Do they understand what the consequences are if they don't carry out their role the way that they've been assigned? And then improve. We have a lot of different ways of carrying out training today than what we had previously. So it's making sure that as your training needs change, your training delivery changes so that you're not delivering the same training over and over again and expecting a different outcome that was there. So with that, if you need some support with delivering training, please reach out to us. Please contact us at that www.nsflearn.com. Right now, until at least later on into 2021, all of our training is virtual, that we are delivering either self-paced e-learn or through Adobe Webinar, a different webinar platform that's very interactive that's there. And all of those courses as they are coming up are available, and you'll see them on that www.nsflearn. And with that, I thank you very much for listening, hopeful to go through. Hopefully I've given you some tips and some tools to improve your employee engagement and gain additional return on investment for your training dollar. And with that, I wish you to stay safe and to keep well and have the best training programs that you can. So thank you very much, everybody. Bye now.